The galaxy was at war. Across countless star systems, peaceful planets once filled with life and hope were now reduced to smoldering ruins. The Zorvans, a fierce alien race, had arrived. Their ships, dark and unyielding, struck without warning. Entire worlds fell to their might. In a matter of days, the galaxies trembled. The once powerful Galactic Council, the governing body of countless alien civilizations, had failed to stop them. For centuries, the Galactic Council had maintained peace among the stars, with powerful armies and technology beyond what most species could even imagine. The Council had always been the galaxy's protector, but now it was clear. The Council was no longer strong enough to stop the Zorvans. On one of the most important planets in the Council's territory, the leaders of the Council gathered in a massive chamber. The room was filled with beings from every corner of the galaxy, their faces grim with fear. A hologram floated in the center of the room, showing planets in flames, their once bright cities now nothing more than ashes. "This cannot continue," said the voice of a tall, silver-skinned alien, his eyes sharp and full of worry. He was Varnax, the High Chancellor of the Galactic Council. "We've tried everything. Our fleets are too small, our weapons too weak. The Zorvans will destroy us all unless we do something drastic." There was silence in the room. Leaders from other races exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. The reality of the situation was clear. They had never encountered an enemy like this before. The Zorvans didn't care about negotiations, alliances, or treaties. They cared only about conquest and destruction. Varnax turned to the communication console. "We've been sending messages for weeks now," he said, his voice heavy with desperation. "But there is no response. The other races, our allies, are falling one by one. If we do not act now, it will be too late." Another voice spoke up, this one coming from a slender humanoid figure with golden skin. "Varnax, you're asking for a miracle. What can we possibly do that we haven't already tried?" Varnax turned to her, his expression hardening. "We need help. Help from someone powerful, someone who can turn the tide." The council chamber grew tense. Most of the leaders knew what Varnax was suggesting, but none of them dared to speak it aloud. There was only one race in the galaxy known for its unpredictability, its incredible resilience in the face of impossible odds. The humans. "They're too primitive," said a voice from the back of the room. It was from a creature with a sharp insect-like face known as the Vorn. "They don't have the strength we need. They're too small, too weak. Let's not waste any more time." But Varnax was not so easily swayed. "I disagree," he said, his voice resolute. "They may be small, but their strength lies in their spirit. When others would have given up, humanity fought on. When all hope seemed lost, they found a way to survive. They have fought wars on their own, against enemies far stronger than themselves. If anyone can help us, it is them." The room went silent again as the idea began to take root. It was crazy. It was reckless, but it was their last hope. "We must send a message," Varnax continued. "A desperate plea. If they do not respond, then we will be lost. But if they do, we may have a chance." And so, the Galactic Council agreed. A message was sent. A plea for help was broadcast across the stars, reaching every corner of the galaxy. It was a message of desperation. "We have fallen. We are powerless against the Zorvans. Our fleets are destroyed, our worlds burning. Only one race has the strength to fight back. Humanity, we call upon you. Will you answer?" The message echoed across the vast reaches of space, a desperate cry from a galaxy on the brink of collapse. Back on Earth, life continued as usual. People went about their daily routines, unaware that the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. The human governments had been focused on their own problems, economic struggles, political tensions, and the constant drive for technological progress. The idea of galactic warfare seemed distant, almost like something out of a science fiction novel. Then, the message arrived. It was a strange, almost incomprehensible signal at first, but when scientists decoded it, they found a plea for help, a cry from the stars. At first, they thought it was a prank. But as the message continued to play, Earth's leaders grew silent. This was no joke. The message was real. President Kira Ashford sat at the head of the table, her face pale as she read the decoded message. Her eyes scanned the words, disbelief written across her features. The rest of the council was silent. "Is this real?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's real," said Commander Arthur Graves, a decorated officer in the Earth Defense Force. He was the one who had been analyzing the transmission. "This isn't some hoax. The Galactic Council, the most powerful political body in the galaxy, they're calling for our help." The room erupted into chaos. Arguments broke out between leaders, many skeptical of the message's authenticity. Some questioned whether Earth should get involved in a war so far from home. Others feared the cost of such an action. But President Ashford stood up, silencing them all. "We cannot ignore this," she said firmly. "The fate of the galaxy is at stake. If we do not help, countless lives will be lost. We are humanity. Our strength lies in our ability to rise against the odds. We cannot turn our backs on the galaxy." Her words settled over the room. It was clear. Humanity would answer the call. The human fleet, though small in number, would face the Zorvans. Earth's response was their first real step into the galactic arena, and the universe would never be the same. Back on Earth, the message from the Galactic Council had caused a stir unlike anything humanity had seen before. News outlets buzzed with excitement, and the world's leaders gathered in emergency meetings, unsure of what to do. The plea for help from across the stars was not something they had expected. Earth had never been involved in galactic politics before, let alone a galactic war. But now, the fate of countless worlds rested on their shoulders. President Kira Ashford, the leader of the United Earth Coalition, sat in her office, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had always been a woman of action, but this was different. This was a fight that spanned across the stars, against an enemy unlike any Earth had ever faced. The Zorvans were ruthless. Their technology advanced beyond anything humanity had encountered. Earth was powerful, yes, but not powerful enough to take on an entire galactic empire. She looked across the room at the military advisors, scientists, and diplomats who had gathered to help her make the decision. Commander Arthur Graves, head of the Earth Defense Force, stood by her side, his face grim. He had seen battles before, but nothing like this. The galaxy's call for help had been clear. Humanity was their last hope. "I still can't believe it," President Ashford said quietly, looking out the window at the city below. "We're not even a part of this galaxy's power structure. We've always been on the outside looking in." Graves nodded, his face etched with concern. "But that's what makes us unique, ma'am. The Zorvans may have the technology, but they don't have our drive. They don't have our will to survive." Ashford turned to him, her eyes locking with his. "Do you really think we can win? Can humanity really take on the Zorvans and their fleets?" Graves hesitated. He had served in some of the toughest battles Earth had faced. He knew humanity's strength, its ability to overcome the impossible. But this was different. The Zorvans weren't just another alien species. They were a force of nature, destructive and unyielding. "We have a chance," he said slowly, his voice firm. "It will be difficult, but we have something they don't, the will to fight. They've never faced an enemy like us." Ashford stood up from her desk and walked to the window, gazing out at the skyline. She thought about the billions of lives, depending on her decision. She thought about the people who had been watching the news, the people who were scared but hopeful. The message from the council wasn't just a call for help. It was a test of humanity's resolve, a test of their courage. "We can't fail them," Ashford said quietly, almost to herself. "We can't fail the galaxy." Graves nodded. "We'll do everything we can. The fleet's already preparing to launch. We'll send the best of our ships and soldiers to the front lines. But we'll need more than just technology. We'll need a plan." Meanwhile, across Earth, preparations for the impending war had begun in full force. The United Earth Coalition had ordered the mobilization of every military resource available. The Earth Defense Force, EDF, had been trained for many types of conflicts, but the idea of fighting in an intergalactic war was something new for them. Still, the EDF was known for its relentless dedication to its cause. The fleet, consisting of advanced human warships, had been constructed over the last few decades in secret. Earth had long known the importance of being prepared, should the time ever come to defend itself against alien threats. Now, that time had arrived. As construction, crews worked around the clock to finish the final preparations. The EDF's elite soldiers underwent rigorous training. They were going to be sent to the far reaches of the galaxy to fight a war that most of them had only heard about in stories. But this was no story. This was real. Lieutenant Sarah Donovan, a young and determined officer in the EDF, stood on the tarmac, watching as the massive warships were readied for departure. She had been selected to lead one of the human strike forces, and the weight of that responsibility was not lost on her. Her hands clenched into fists as she thought about the soldiers who would be under her command. She had trained them well, but she knew that facing the Zorvans was unlike any enemy they had ever encountered. She turned to her second-in-command, Captain Elias Grant, who had been with her through countless battles on Earth. His calm demeanor and sharp mind were invaluable, but even he couldn't hide the tension in his eyes. "They're ready," Donovan said, her voice steady, but with an edge of uncertainty. "But are we?" Grant gave a small nod. "We're as ready as we can be. The fleet has been outfitted with the best weapons we have, and our soldiers are among the best trained in the galaxy. The Zorvans may have advanced technology, but they've never faced human tactics. We'll show them what we can do." Donovan nodded, feeling a surge of confidence at his words. She had always believed in the strength of the human spirit, and now, more than ever, she believed it would be their key to victory. Back at Earth's command center, President Ashford watched the final preparations unfold on a giant screen. The fleet was ready. Soldiers were boarding their ships, eager to take their place in history. The weight of her decision still hung heavily over her, but she knew it was the right one. "We have to do this," Ashford said, looking at the screen, her voice filled with resolve. "The galaxy needs us." And so, the fleet was launched. As the human ships blasted into space, leaving Earth's atmosphere behind, the soldiers aboard knew they were not just fighting for their home planet, they were fighting for the future of the galaxy. They were humanity's last hope. At that moment, the Zorvans were not sitting idle. The news of Earth's fleet reaching the battlefield had already traveled through the galaxy. The Zorvans, confident in their strength, did not feel threatened by this new challenger. They had crushed every civilization that had dared to defy them. Earth was just another planet to be conquered. But what the Zorvans did not know was that they had underestimated the one thing they could not calculate: the human heart, the strength to fight, the determination to survive, and the courage to face even the impossible. The vastness of space stretched out before the human fleet as it traveled toward the Zorvan-controlled sectors. Earth's ships moved in unison, their sleek hulls glinting under the light of distant stars. Inside the warships, soldiers prepared for what could be the toughest fight of their lives. Among them was Lieutenant Sarah Donovan, her hands gripping the cool metal of the ship's control panel as she looked out at the stars ahead. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was focused. This was no longer just a mission, it was a test of humanity's survival. Her crew had been briefed on everything they could expect, but there were still so many unknowns. The Zorvans were infamous for their brutal tactics. They didn't negotiate, they didn't ask questions, they just took, and they were unstoppable. Yet, as Donovan stood there, she could feel the unshakable belief that humanity could fight back. It had always been their strength, the ability to fight against the odds, to never give up. At the command center of the fleet, Commander Arthur Graves sat at his post, his eyes glued to the screen showing the fleet's position in real time. The human fleet was small compared to the Zorvans, but Graves knew the power of human ingenuity. He wasn't worried about their numbers. The Zorvans may have strength and numbers, but humanity had something they lacked: adaptability. He turned, to President Ashford, who stood beside him, watching the monitors in silence. She had been calm during the preparations, but now, as the reality of the battle ahead set in, even she couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. "Do you think they'll take us seriously?" Ashford asked, her voice quiet. "I mean, we're just humans. We don't belong in a galactic war." Graves gave a reassuring smile, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "I think we're about to prove we belong. The Zorvans may have the advantage of size and strength, but we have the advantage of adaptability. We're not bound by the same rules they follow. We fight differently and we think differently. That's what will win this." Ashford nodded. Though the weight of the decision still pressed down on her, she had no doubt about the human spirit, but she wasn't sure if it could stand up to the might of the Zorvans. As the fleet approached the outskirts of the Zorvan Empire, the situation grew tense. Every ship, every soldier, and every officer knew what was at stake. But there was still a sense of disbelief among many of the soldiers. Some had doubts. They had trained for years, but nothing had prepared them for what they were about to face. The Zorvans had crushed entire civilizations with ease. How could humans, small, fragile beings from a backwater planet, be expected to turn the tide? In one of the fleet's smaller briefing rooms, Donovan stood with her team, going over the final mission details. She glanced at each of them, sensing the unease in the air. These men and women had been through hell together, but this was different. The odds were stacked against them, and they knew it. She could see the skepticism in their eyes, the fear that they might not make it out alive. "Listen up," Donovan said, her voice firm but calm. "I know some of you are scared. Hell, I'm scared too. But we're not here to win. We're here to survive. And if we can survive long enough to make a difference, then maybe, just maybe, the Zorvans will realize that humans aren't the ones to mess with." Her words had an impact. She could see some of the tension ease in her soldiers' eyes. They might not all be convinced, but they were ready to fight. And that was what mattered. They didn't need to be sure of victory. They needed to believe that they could fight with everything they had. Back on Earth, the Council's leaders continued to monitor the situation. The Galactic Council's representatives, many of whom had initially dismissed humanity's involvement, now watched in awe as the human fleet moved forward. They had doubted Earth's ability to make an impact on the galactic scale, but as the fleet drew closer to the heart of the Zorvan Empire, they began to question their assumptions. "What if they succeed?" asked a female diplomat from the Zorvans' most powerful ally, a race of towering muscular aliens known as the Sereth. "What if these humans are more than we gave them credit for?" "Impossible," a male representative of the Rixian race replied with a sneer. "We've seen their kind before. They're not much different from the others, all bark and no bite." But in the pit of his stomach, the Rixian could feel a nagging doubt. The humans were different. He had seen the reports. Their armies were small but well organized. Their tactics were unpredictable, and they seemed to thrive under pressure. But that didn't mean they could stand up to the might of the Zorvans. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," the Rixian continued, though his voice lacked the confidence it once had. "The Zorvans will crush them as they did with the others." The diplomat from the Sreth took a long, deep breath. "I hope you're right." As Earth's fleet neared the Zorvan border, the tension reached a breaking point. The time for uncertainty had passed. They were about to face the most powerful alien force ever encountered, and the odds were against them. But as the first shots of the battle rang out across the stars, humanity would prove just how far they were willing to go to survive. The battle started almost immediately as the fleet crossed into Zorvan space. The first wave of Zorvan warships, sleek and intimidating, moved to intercept the human fleet, but the humans weren't intimidated. They had been prepared for this moment for months, and they weren't about to let fear take control now. "All ships, engage," Commander Graves ordered over the fleet-wide communication system. "We're going in, and we're going in hard." The human ships moved with precision, their engines roaring as they collided with the Zorvan forces. The humans fought with everything they had, using every trick and tactic they knew to outmaneuver the Zorvans. The space battle was chaotic. Blasts of energy, laser beams, and explosions filled the void of space. The human ships, though smaller, were quick and nimble, making it difficult for the larger Zorvan vessels to lock onto them. Despite their best efforts, the Zorvans struggled to adapt. They were used to enemies who fought in predictable patterns, enemies they could overwhelm with brute force. But humanity was different. They fought with strategy, with unexpected moves that kept the Zorvans off balance. The humans weren't just defending, they were fighting back. As the battle raged on, it became clear. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. They weren't just another race in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with. The Zorvans, powerful as they were, hadn't counted on the human spirit, and now they were beginning to realize their mistake. The war had only just begun, but one thing was certain: humanity was here to stay. The battle had raged for hours, and the human fleet was beginning to feel the strain. The Zorvans were relentless, their ships massive and terrifying. They didn't give an inch, pushing back with all the power they had. But the human fleet fought, back with a determination that was impossible to ignore. Lieutenant Sarah Donovan stood at the bridge of her flagship, watching the chaos unfold through the large viewport. The battle was far from over, but she could see the tide beginning to shift. The Zorvans were starting to falter, their ships growing more erratic in their movements. The humans weren't just holding their ground, they were forcing the Zorvans to fight harder than they had ever expected. "Status report," Donovan called, turning to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Marcus Wren. "We're holding steady, Lieutenant," Wren said, his voice calm but strained. "We've taken some hits, but we've also dealt some serious damage to their flanks. The Zorvans are starting to retreat, but they're regrouping. They won't give up easily." Donovan's eyes narrowed as she watched the Zorvan ships pull back, only to form a new line of defense. They were smart, adapting quickly to the tactics the humans were using. But the humans were just as adaptable. They knew they couldn't rely on brute strength alone. They needed to outthink the Zorvans, to catch them off guard. "We have to keep them on the move," Donovan said, her voice steady. "No rest for them, launch another strike." Her orders were carried out immediately. The human ships broke formation and darted forward, weaving in and out of enemy fire. The Zorvans tried to adjust, but the humans were too fast. They darted in with precision, striking where the Zorvans were weakest, then pulling back before they could be countered. "Nice work, Lieutenant," Commander Graves said over the comms, his voice full of approval. "Keep it up, but don't get overconfident. The Zorvans are dangerous when they're cornered." "Understood," Donovan replied. "We'll keep the pressure on." Back in the Galactic Command Center, the representatives of the Galactic Council watched the battle unfold. Many of them were in shock. The human fleet, once dismissed as insignificant, was holding its own against the might of the Zorvans. The humans weren't just fighting, they were winning. Slowly, the tide of battle began to shift, and hope started to flicker in the hearts of those watching. One by one, the leaders of the council exchanged uncertain glances. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were beginning to see the consequences of their mistake. Earth's forces were not just skilled, they were fearless. "They've adapted faster than I thought possible," said Varnax, the High Chancellor of the Galactic Council, his voice tinged with awe. "The humans are turning the Zorvans' own tactics against them." The Rixian representative, who had once doubted humanity's ability to contribute to the war, now looked on with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. "We should have never doubted them," he muttered. "They're unpredictable, they're relentless, but will it be enough?" "I don't know," Varnax said, his voice heavy with thought. "The Zorvans are relentless in their desire to conquer. They won't back down easily." "Then let's hope the humans are as relentless as we think they are," the Sreth diplomat said quietly, eyes still fixed on the unfolding battle. On the battlefield, the Zorvans began to grow desperate. Their ships, once a nearly unstoppable force, were now being whittled down piece by piece. The human fleet, though outnumbered, had begun to use every trick in the book to stay one step ahead, and it was working. The Zorvans, for the first time, were unsure of themselves. Their leaders, who had once been confident in their ability to crush anything in their path, were now panicking. They had underestimated the humans, underestimated their resolve, and now they were paying the price. "We need to regroup," one of the Zorvan commanders growled, his voice full of frustration. "The humans are adapting too quickly. We must break their will before it's too late." But the Zorvans had already made a critical mistake. They had assumed that humanity would break under pressure, that they would fold when the stakes were high. But they hadn't counted on humanity's ability to keep going, to keep fighting no matter what. The humans were not fighting for glory or power or conquest. They were fighting to survive. And that made them dangerous. Back on Earth, the mood was tense, but there was a new sense of hope. The message from the battlefield had been clear. The humans were succeeding. The Zorvans were not invincible. But there was still a long way to go. President Ashford stood in the command center, her face illuminated by the holographic screens showing the battle. She felt a sense of pride, but it was tempered by the reality of what was still ahead. "How's the fleet doing?" Ashford asked, her voice steady but filled with concern. "They're holding strong, ma'am," Commander Graves replied. "The Zorvans are retreating, but they're not giving up. They'll regroup and come at us again, and we'll have to be ready for them. But the humans are proving something that no one thought was possible. We're winning." Ashford looked at the screen, her heart swelling with pride. "We're just getting started." As the hours passed, the humans continued to push forward. They kept the pressure on, never letting the Zorvans catch their breath. Every strike was calculated, every movement deliberate. They weren't just fighting, they were outsmarting the enemy. Donovan, standing at the bridge once more, couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. She had seen it in her soldiers' eyes. They were no longer just afraid to die, they were ready to win. "All ships prepare for a final push," Donovan called over the comms. "We hit them hard and we hit them fast, no mercy. We end this today." As the fleet moved into position for the final push, Donovan felt a calm resolve settle over her. The battle was far from over, but humanity had shown its strength, and that strength was unstoppable. The Zorvans, now fully aware that they were no longer facing an easy victory, began to panic. They regrouped, but it was too late. The human fleet, battered but unbroken, was ready to finish what they had started. The Zorvans may have had the numbers, but humanity had something much more powerful, an unbreakable will. The stars ahead seemed to shimmer with a new light as the human fleet moved closer to the Zorvan capital. The Zorvans had regrouped, but the human fleet had not only held its ground, it had pushed them back. The battle had turned in favor of humanity, but there was still a long way to go. The Zorvans were fierce, their ships large and heavily armed. However, the humans had shown that their will to fight was stronger than the Zorvans had ever imagined. Lieutenant Sarah Donovan stood on the bridge of her flagship, her eyes fixed on the battlefield ahead. The final confrontation was about to begin. The Zorvans had retreated to their capital, a massive fortress planet that sat at the heart of their empire. It was heavily defended, but Donovan knew this was their chance to end the war once and for all. "All ships prepare for the final assault," Donovan said, her voice calm but determined. "We hit them with everything we've got. We can't let them regroup again. This is our moment." "Understood, Lieutenant," Captain Elias Grant replied, his face set in a stern expression. He had been with Donovan through every battle and he knew the stakes. This wasn't just about victory. It was about survival. The human fleet was battered, but far from broken. The Zorvans had underestimated the humans, thinking their overwhelming numbers and firepower would be enough to crush them. But the humans had proven they were more than just a nuisance. They were a force to be reckoned with. As the fleet moved into position for the final assault, the Zorvan ships appeared on the horizon. They were preparing to defend their homeworld with everything they had left. But the human fleet was ready. This time there would be no retreat. There would be no second chances. Back in the Galactic Council's command center, the representatives watched in awe as the human fleet moved toward the Zorvan capital. They had never seen anything like this. Humanity, once dismissed as insignificant, was now leading the charge in a war that had threatened to consume the entire galaxy. "They're doing it," Varnax, the High Chancellor, said, his voice full of disbelief. "They're actually doing it." The Sereth diplomat, who had once questioned humanity's role in the war, now looked on with a mixture of admiration and respect. "I did not think they had it in them," she admitted, "but they've proven us all wrong." "We underestimated them," the Rixian representative said, his voice filled with frustration. "We thought they were just a small, insignificant race. But they've shown us that size does not matter. It's the will to fight that counts." "Yes," Varnak said, his gaze fixed on the holographic display of the battlefield. "And humanity has that in spades." The Zorvans had failed to see what made humans so dangerous. They thought they could simply crush them with sheer force, but humanity had proven that it wasn't just about power. It was about the will to fight against impossible odds. The Zorvans had underestimated that, and now they were paying the price. Back. On the human fleet's flagship, the tension was palpable. Commander Arthur Graves paced back and forth on the bridge, his mind racing. This was it. The final battle. The fate of the galaxy was about to be decided. He glanced at the tactical display, watching as the Zorvan ships moved into position to defend their capital. They were preparing for a fight, but the humans were ready. "All ships engage," Graves ordered, his voice sharp. "No mercy. We finish this now." The human fleet surged forward, charging at the Zorvan defenses with everything they had. The first wave of human fighters launched into the fray, darting in and out of the Zorvan fire with incredible speed. The Zorvans tried to respond, but they were slow, and the human ships were too nimble. As the human fleet pushed forward, the Zorvans retaliated with everything they had left. The battle became a blur of explosions and flashing lights as the two forces clashed in space. The human ships, though smaller, used their agility and speed to their advantage. They darted between the Zorvan ships, launching precision strikes at weak points in the enemy's defenses. Lieutenant Donovan watched as one of her own ships, the Valor, took a direct hit. The ship rocked violently, but the crew held their ground. "Report," Donovan called out, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We're damaged, but we're still operational, Lieutenant," the communications officer replied. "We've lost shields, but we can still fight." Donovan nodded. "Good. Keep fighting. We're not backing down." The human fleet pressed on, refusing to yield an inch. The Zorvans, despite their overwhelming power, were beginning to falter. They had never faced an enemy like this before, an enemy that fought with everything they had, with no intention of surrendering. As the battle continued, the Zorvans began to realize that they were losing. Their ships were falling one by one as the human fleet relentlessly pushed forward. For the first time, the Zorvans began to panic. Their leaders had never thought they would face a challenge like this. They had expected to wipe out the humans with ease, but instead they found themselves on the brink of defeat. "How is this happening?" one of the Zorvan commanders shouted, watching as human ships continued to strike their capital's defenses. "We should have crushed them." "They are too strong," another commander replied, his voice filled with frustration. "They keep adapting. We can't keep up with their tactics. They're unpredictable." The Zorvans had no answers. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. The human fleet was pushing forward with relentless force, and the Zorvans had no way to stop them. On Earth, the command center watched as the battle reached its climax. The human fleet was winning, but there was still a sense of caution. The Zorvans were a dangerous enemy, and they would not go down without a fight. President Ashford stood at the front of the room, watching the monitors with bated breath. "We can do this," Ashford said quietly, her voice full of determination. "We've come this far. We can't stop now." The human fleet continued to press on, and slowly but surely, the Zorvans began to fall back. The once mighty empire was crumbling, and humanity was leading the charge. As the final Zorvan ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, the battlefield fell silent. The human fleet had won. Against all odds, humanity had emerged victorious. Lieutenant Donovan stood at the bridge of her ship, her eyes fixed on the empty space ahead. The battle was over, but the war was not. The humans had proven they were not to be underestimated, and now the galaxy would have to reckon with that truth. "We did it," Donovan whispered, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. "We did it."